everybody. Today is, I lost track of what, episode 5 of season 5.
It is episode 5.
Oh, I like the symmetry of that. Episode 5, season 5 of what we read. We're here to talk about more books that we read. So I'm going to kick things right off with a very odd book. It's a book called Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, I want to say, and the translator is Ginny Tapley Takamori. So this is a book literally about someone who works in a convenience store. This is about a character named Keiko. She's always been considered kind of strange, a little offbeat, and she's found her life's calling, I guess, working at a convenience store. Let's just say that the novel starts with her being a child, and then recounting the moment when she first gets employed by the convenience store. And then it jumps to 18 years later. She's like 36 years old, still has the same job, has never dated anyone, has very few friends. She's comfortable with what she's got in her life.
She's comfortable
with her life, but she knows that the people around her are, you know, kind of might be judging her based on societal expectations, and so her family's getting a little worried, you know, about that. There is a cynical, sort of embittered young man, who comes to work at the convenience store, and he kind of reflects Keiko's feelings in a way that she wasn't anticipating, and so he ends up kind of upsetting the contentment she's been feeling. And whether or not that turns out to be for the better, you find out by reading this book.
Fair.
This is a very odd book. I thought it was really interesting because I do enjoy reading stories that deep dive into characters, especially if the characters are unique from any that I've ever encountered. And Keiko is very like that. She has a very particular way of viewing life and way of thinking about things, and because you're in her head for most of this novel, you get to experience that firsthand. I do think some people are going to find that very strange, because she does think things that are very offbeat and not necessarily how most people would think of things. I thought it was just odd, but not in a way that put me off. I found it quite intriguing, and I couldn't stop listening to it because I was curious to see how Keiko would, you know, be by the end of this story, by the end of this book. I think your reaction to Keiko and her slice of life story and all of the, I want to say a little bit, there are some parts that are a little wild. The circumstances that she finds herself in are a little absurd, a little off the wall. I think it will depend on how you choose to frame this story, because if you're reading it from the perspective of expecting something very, I don't know, realistic and literary, it's not precisely what this one is. There's something a little odd and strange, but there's something compelling about the way that the odd and strange is presented. And it resulted in me being unable to stop listening to this particular book, because I actually listened to it on audiobook. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't necessarily think it was particularly funny, although I think other people might have. I do think it was very amusing though, so I'm glad I picked this up. It was very much on a whim that I decided to be like, hey, I'm gonna read this book. Speaking of Japanese literature, I actually read 2 more things that we're gonna talk about today. So the first is If Cats Disappeared from the World by Genki Kawamura. This is translated by, hold on one second, translated by Eric Selland. So the concept of this book is almost exactly what it says in the title. There is a young man, he is a post office worker, and he gets diagnosed with very terminal cancer, and he's gonna die any day now. On the day that he finds this out, he gets approached by the devil, and the devil says, if we can agree that something will disappear from the world, you get to live an extra day. And so this dude, his life has been pretty ordinary, hasn't really done anything too extraordinary. He thinks, well, this is a good deal, right? This is the thing. And so things chosen by the devil and agreed upon by them both start disappearing from the world. And it starts off as kind of feeling like this fantastical story is gonna take some fantastical turn, but it's not. It's basically a story where the fantastical element is just meant to goad this person, this main character, into realizing things about his life and the world and himself. It's almost as if he's reflecting on things while on the brink of death, which often happens to people in real life, as far as I know. I actually was surprised by how much I got sucked into it. I don't necessarily think the writing style, although I do think that might be the translation, it might come across better in native Japanese, but I don't think necessarily the way that this was narrated was perfectly in sync with my taste, but it definitely got its point across, and it also managed to stick the landing by the end of the book, which I really appreciated. I did have quite a few things in it, because there were some moments and some thoughts that this character had that I was like, that is a really good thing to be thinking about or reflecting on. So I picked this one up on a whim as well. I'm glad I read it though, because it really had me... This is a week apparently where I was reading this one and a couple of other books where the characters are reflecting about death. And I was like, I don't know why I've been reading this or why this is a theme for me lately, but I don't know, it's just interesting to see how different people grapple with death and what they think and what they do. And so, glad I read that. This one sort of also has that slight aspect of grappling with death, but not in as big a way. So the book is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which is by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and this one is translated by Geoffrey Trousselot. So I picked this one up mostly because of the cover, because look at it. How could I not? But I do really like the premise of this story. It's said that in Tokyo there is a cafe where if you sit at a particular chair and have a very special cup of coffee poured for you, you can actually go back in time. It only lasts for as long as it takes before the coffee gets cold. And there are a couple of other restrictions in place too, but for the most part, you could go back in time. And the thing about this is that it's actually, I want to say 4 interconnected stories. You meet the entire cast of characters who are the essential focus of each one of these stories early on in the book, but you don't quite see how they're going to end up, you know, being the main character in the story until you're reading their part. And I really liked it. I was so surprised because I knew it had been short stories going into it, and I do okay with most short story like type collections. Yeah. I think what I liked about this one was that it was a very fluid, flowing from one to the next to the next to the next. Yeah. And each of the stories was different, but because it was the same author and the same concept, it felt tied together in a really strong way. I like how this author grapples as well with very human things and human relationships. A lot of the stories involve people trying to go to the past because they realize they've done something that they want to undo or redo in a relationship.
Sure, yeah.
Or fix, or like try to come to terms with. And I think it's just interesting because once again, it's one of those books where you're grappling with certain realities of life and seeing how each of these characters is able to sort of experience that and what they bring out after they're able to travel back in time was really interesting. I do know that there is a sequel. I'm not sure if I'm going to read it because I've heard kind of like mixed feelings about it, but I kind of want to read it because I like the concept of the cafe in the first place. So I might pick it up. But yeah, this one was also very good. I'm glad that I got the chance to pick it up.
Lovely.
Alright, so what's on the docket for you today? More comics?
Just a couple of stories about some Avengers that sort of raise more questions than they provide answers. I'm going to start with this particular piece by Jason Aaron. It's Avengers Volume 7, Age of Khonshu.
I have no idea what that means, but okay.
At this point in time, I almost don't know if it's sort of like an Elseworld sort of like timeline thing, or it was just like a nice story to tell, because it does go to like really weird places. It centers around Moon Knight, who
Isn't that Oscar Isaac now?
Yeah. So and
that's all I remember about Moon Knight.
Yeah, and while Moon Knight was arguably, you know, he's got the whole Batman meets Egypt type thing where I'm a vigilante, but also my powers come from the moon. Oh, so it's like Sailor Moon meets Batman, actually. Because moon powers, but...
I know. Actually, isn't there a Sailor Moon character that really is, like a version of Tuxedo Mask?
Oh my gosh,
is
the
Moon
Knight of the Moonlight.
It's basically the same
right.
thing.
But less sparklies and more cowl.
Hey man, the Moon Knight version of Tuxedo Mask is actually the more useful version of him, so... That
is true. Although in Crystal, he does slug like somebody.
Gotta still watch Crystal, though.
Anyway, Moon Knight just happens, and it's just weird because Concert like tries to take over the world, and the Avengers, it's the craziest thing. It feels like a B-movie plot executed on A-movie levels, if I must say. Like, the writing wasn't I felt like it felt like whoever wrote this, like Jason Aaron. I don't know if this was just him having fun with it, because it was written well. I think it was written well. It's just the concept to me is just like, let's just make the God of the Moon take over everything and just sort of make him versus all of the Avengers. And he does that. He just beats the crap out of all of the Avengers, and I'm just like, I don't know that that's feasible. But whatever, it is what it is. So there is that. It was a weird way to like go figure like that. I don't know if there was anything else after this run by Jason Aaron, but that's a weird way to end it if that was the last one. So there's that. And Spider-Woman Volume 1, Bad Blood.
Sorry, had to.
Jessica Drew, and I'm so glad that you'll see it in the sort of like the front cover. She is wearing the traditional Spider-Woman costume. I grew up watching Spider-Woman. Spider-Man had a cartoon called Spider-Man is Amazing Friends, and he was with Iceman, and he was with Firestar, and they had a really fun sort of like trio friendship type deal. Like they looked like your friendly neighborhood college kids that just so happened to be your super teenager like superheroes. What aired roughly at around that time in Manila, I want to say, and I would like to think even Spider-Man aired after, was Spider-Woman. And it was Jessica Drew, and she was bitten by a spider, and then her dad gave her some serum that was experimental, and she developed spider powers, more so than Peter. So apart from everything that Peter can do, which is the strength and the agility and whatever, she can fire venom blasts. She didn't need web shooters because she could just shoot webs from the tips of her fingers.
Oh, nice.
And she could glide.
That's convenient.
And she could glide/fly, which is so weird. But whatever, I'll take it. And she has that beautiful red and like yellow kind of deal. They retconned everything to make her like a Hydra agent. It was a weird when they finally put her into the comics.
Okay.
And so to have Jessica, another Jessica, who's also Carol Danvers' friend. Carol collects Jessicas, I find. It deals with her past. And for me, it was as a Jessica Drew fan, I like how this sort of like reminds everybody what her origin story is without having to retell her origin story.
Okay.
And it brings it back into the sort of like the present. She also has like apparently some family issues that need to be dealt with. So I like that. If you're a Spider-Woman fan, again, this was not the definitive Spider-Woman story, but as a fan of the cartoons, wanting to know what's she like in the comics, this is a great starting off point.
Okay.
So there's that. Lastly, but certainly not leastly, that's a word now. All words are made up. Hawkeye, Freefall by Matthew Rosenberg. I love that the Clint that they portray here isn't the fatherly, well put together, sort of like, father of three type, I will go Ronin and kill all of the terrible people who survived the snap because good people disappeared and they didn't deserve to, not Jeremy Renner, obviously. This guy is a rogue, and it makes sense because in the comics Hawkeye wasn't like an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. I think he was part of a circus. And he was one of the bad guys, along with Scarlet Witch, and then he just turned good towards the end. So that same rogue is the same dude here. And things get funny when somebody who was running around in a Ronin costume gets found, messing people up. And they're like, yo, was that you? And he's like, why does everybody think that was me? And it's totally believable that it could have been him. Until the plot twist reveals who it actually is. Mm-hmm. It's bananas. It's actually a great ride. I would say this is a definitive Hawkeye story only because it really tells you who comic book Hawkeye is.
Okay.
And this is a great one. And he feels like every inch the rogue that he was always meant to be. And so I highly recommend that. Clint Barton is not an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. He is a rogue. And it's lovely. So there's that.
Back to contemporary books. This time they're all YA contemporaries with just the right hint of romance. So first is Made in Korea by Sarah Sook. This is about two teens, Valerie and Wes. Valerie and her cousin Charlie have been running a very successful K-beauty business at their school for a couple of years. And Wes is the new kid who comes to school. And he also needs to make money pretty quickly, so he ends up inadvertently creating a rival business. And so these two are competing to, outsell, outperform, beat each other, but they're also developing a mutual understanding towards one another because there's a lot that they can relate to each other on.
Okay.
And this is a really cute YA contemporary. I quite enjoyed this whole rival businesses thing, but I also really like that each of these characters is basically forced to face their own individual circumstances with their home and living situations. They have different things that they are dealing with. Valerie is a younger sibling and she is not the ideal Korean child that her parents want her to be. And Wes, on the other hand, he is a good kid, but he wants a different thing for his future than what his parents want for him. And so they're both grappling with that. They need the businesses to achieve certain goals of theirs. It's all, like I already described, a very cute setup for a story. I quite enjoyed it. I devoured it pretty quickly, all things considered. I like the K-beauty aspect to it. I also liked all the Korean food that they mentioned. And I think that it's one of those YA reads that just was really quick and really fun, and you should definitely check it out. Speaking of fun and quick reads, Tokyo Ever After by Emiko Jean is basically What a Girl Wants, but in book form and with the Japanese monarchy.
Yeah.
So the entire concept of this book is that Izumi figures out very early on in the story that her dad is actually the crown prince of Japan, who is set to inherit the throne, which makes her a princess.
The crown princess of
Her
Japan.
mom has never revealed that to her in the past for reasons that you will find out later on. But because this revelation has suddenly found its way into the news, Izumi has no choice but to, well, it's not that she has no choice, she actually wants to go. She's invited to Japan in order to reconnect with her dad and sort of get to see the rest of her family, and so she goes, except that it's not entirely what she expected it was going to be like, and she eventually has to decide, like, is she really willing to step into this new role that she needs to embrace if she wants to be a part of his life? Or how far is he willing to go in order to keep a relationship with her as well? There's also romance in this one, there's friendship in this one, there's a lot of time in Japan and also around the Japanese monarchy in this, and it was really fun. My friend Alex is actually the person who said that it was What a Girl Wants, because prior to that, it had been pitched to me as Crazy Rich Asians meets The Princess Diaries, which to some extent, both of those things are also good comp titles for this, but it's really What a Girl Wants that is the perfect comp, because the sequence of events is very similar to the events of the movie What a Girl Wants with Amanda Bynes. One of my favorite movies, by the way, so obviously enjoyed myself with this book. I really liked it. I think Izumi is a great main character. I could totally relate to where she was coming from, where she was struggling to sort of fold in the edges of herself that had grown up in the United States in order to fit in with Japanese society and culture, which she knew nothing about, obviously, and to be thrust into a very unfamiliar world with unfamiliar circumstances is no easy feat. And so watching her try to learn how to juggle all of the things she needed to know and do, it was both like secondhand embarrassment when she did things wrong, but also like you were really rooting for her to like find her footing. And more than anything else, I was also really rooting for Izumi to sort of find where she belonged in the grand scheme of things with the Japanese royal family.
With whom she
But most
belonged.
especially with her dad, and you know, just trying to figure out how their relationship was going to play out. Yes, there's a romance in this, like I said. Yes, I love the romance in this one, like I said, because it happens with a particular character who fits the bill when it comes to certain trope I like. I'm not gonna say who the character is because
that would be
they
spoiling.
don't really reveal it until later on, unless you've read enough YA fiction in this sort of like
You'll see it
genre.
coming from
You'll
a
see
mile
it coming
away.
from a mile away, because like I was just here and I'm like, literally the moment she meets this person, I'm like,
Here we go.
That's the guy. But it was very fun. I really hope there's going to be a sequel, because I kind of want to see what happens with Izumi and her dad, because of the way things kind of end for them at the end of this one. Like, it could stand alone really well, but I also think it would be fun to see what happens next. So definitely enjoyed that.
Indeed.
And the last book I'm going to talk about is a 2020 book. It's Rent a Boyfriend by Gloria Chow.
Sure.
Okay, hear me out on this premise though. So, what Gloria Chow did was she took a sort of business model that is popular in some Asian countries where people rent significant others so that they can bring them home to their families for special occasions so that they won't get, you know, bothered by meddling, mostly good-intentioned family members about, you know, getting married and settling down and all of that stuff. So she kind of took that concept and brought it to the United States. So in the story, Chloe, or Jing Jing, she has a very hard time expressing her real self to her family. She wants to be the good Asian daughter for her parents, and so she ends up, you know, contacting Rent for Your Rent, which is where you can rent a significant other that will be the perfect significant other for your parents. And that is how she meets Drew, who is the other character in this book. He goes home with her for Thanksgiving, meets the parents, and then it kind of unfolds where you realize that Chloe's situation with her parents is kind of more complicated than she let on at the beginning, and that Drew's reason for being an employee of Rent for Your Rent is also a little bit more complex than you'd think as well. I actually quite like this, even though it wasn't as lighthearted as I was thinking it was gonna be. Okay, so first let's talk about the romance between Chloe and Drew that inevitably happens. I liked it because even though it began with sort of a lie, obviously, because they weren't in a relationship, right? Even though it began with a lie, when they started revealing the truer parts of themselves to each other, it was just nice because they really fell for those true parts versus like whatever sheen that they had decided to put on. And I like that there was never any miscommunication between them that lasted for too long. Like, it was very easily put to rest, which I really appreciated.
Right.
But the other thing that about the story is just, it's another one of those books where these characters have to come to term with the parental expectations or familial expectations that are put on them, especially as two individuals who are not pursuing traditional paths, or
Right.
at least traditional Asian paths.
You kidding?
While this isn't necessarily true for like a lot of people, it is still true for a portion of the population.
That does happen.
Like, I know people who have had to deal with the same thing, where they're like, I want to do this thing, but my parents wanted me to do the other thing. Like, you know, traditionally be a lawyer, a nurse, a doctor, you know, well-paying job, and also to marry rich, because some people are still in that zone. So it was also interesting to see them grappling individually with their different familial situations. So that also lent a sort of, I guess, edge to the story that I wasn't anticipating. I like that this is told in like shorter chapters, so it was a little easy to like flick through the story, and it didn't diminish the impact of the story itself, but it definitely made it easier to, you know, fly through those pages. I will say that the drama that ensues on Chloe's side, it sounds a little, honestly, it's a little bit out of like a Korean drama or a Chinese drama where like these families knew each other and our reputation is ruined forever. And I get that. I get that the societal structure is still like that and it still exists, but it definitely hit a level that I was like, woo, peak drama, peak TV drama right there. So there's that. It ends in a very satisfying way. So I did end up liking this one. I still think Gloria Chow's original novel is my favorite. Her debut novel, American Panda, was so good. But this one was a pretty good third novel from this author.
Lovely.
Alright, we've made it to the end of this episode of What We Read. We hope you enjoyed hearing us talk about books and comics. If you have any thoughts on anything we mentioned in the video, feel free to leave them down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to find us on other social media sites, you can see all of the links down below. And we'll see you guys with a new video soon. Bye!